the fifth in our series of director roundtables that are free to the public. It's sponsored by our members of the Governance Center at the Conference Board and our sponsors, and we want to thank them for their generous thought leadership and financial support to put on these programs for public use. In particular, we want to thank one of our member companies, Emerson, who has graciously arranged for Admiral Prueher to be here today. And Admiral Prueher is a director of Emerson. And we want to particularly thank our sponsor, PwC, who not only is hosting this today, it's co-sponsoring it, is a major sponsor of the Governance Center, and giving us Marianne Cloyd as a moderator, so they're a triple threat today for us. Marianne Cloyd is the leader of PwC's Center on Governance, which advises audit committee members and boards of directors. She has over 35 years of public accounting experience serving multinational companies and in a variety of industries. She currently serves on PwC's global board. Our panelists today include two experts on China with deep knowledge of the country. David Hoffman leads the Conference Board China Center. He's based in Beijing. He oversees a team of researchers both in China and New York, and he works with a network of eminent advisors and scholars. Before joining the Conference Board, David led an advisory practice of PwC in China for 20 years, where he provided advice on regulatory policy, regulatory risk, and compliance. So one other contribution of PwC to today's event is giving David Hoffman to the Conference Board. And as I mentioned earlier, Admiral Prueher currently serves as a director on the board of Emerson. He's also on the boards of the America Group Corporation, Fluor Corporation, and the U.S.-China Policy Foundation. Admiral Prueher served as ambassador to China from 1999 to 2001, and he completed 35 years of distinguished service in the Navy in 1999, where he was commander-in-chief of the U.S. Pacific Command, and he worked in Asia Pacific, both with the civil and military leaders to promote collective security and cooperation in the area. We're very privileged to have him with us today, and I think this is going to be a very interesting and informative panel. So with that, I will turn it over to Marianne, who will moderate for us.
Donna, thank you very much. And first off, I think the very first thing I want to say is, Admiral, thank you for your years of service to our country. It's much appreciated. It's our pleasure to host this, and Donna, thank you for that lovely introduction. For those who I've not met before, this is where I do need to tell you that obviously I started working when I was 5, because there's clearly no other way that I could have that many years in the profession. But I've had in my roles over the years with the firm, I've had the pleasure of moderating a lot of panels, but I don't think ever one that I've looked more forward to than the one today. So again, I thank you both. To be able to talk about a topic that is so interesting as China with two clearly experts in the field is about as good as it gets. Just so you know, we've got roughly an hour to spend with you today. We'll save time for questions, and we really do encourage that you ask them. What we're really going to talk about today is doing business in China. So there's so many China topics, including, and I spend, as Donna said, a lot of time with boards. So I know that a hot topic in the boardroom today is cybersecurity. So just to set everybody's expectations, that's not a place we're going to go today. That's probably a topic where we could spend, half a day in and of itself. But that's just so you know. So we're really going to focus on the doing business in China. And I think with that, Admiral, I'd like to start with you. Again, you've spent a lot of years in that part of the world, including your years as ambassador. So would you maybe set the stage for us from your perspective?
I'll try to do that. Thanks very much, Marianne. And I asked Marianne, as I should do, if there are any ringers in the audience, and she said none that I know of. Then I saw one walk in, and with Bob Bayless, but if there are any others, would you identify yourselves now? I think what am I? I'm not an old China hand, and in jobs I've had a lot of chances to speak to groups where the people in the audience had written the books that I would go to find the answers to the questions they asked. So I hope this is not that kind of audience exactly. But I'd like to open up with a few comments, and my main background is, of course, is in the national security part, but the Chinese tie these things together quite well, even better than we do, I think. And last night it happened that I got to participate in a reception with Ambassador Cloyd, the new ambassador from China to the U.S., who's just come in. He was from 2007 to 2009. He was their ambassador to Japan. He's a veteran foreign service guy in the foreign ministry in China, and known as a solid straight shooter and a troubleshooter for the Chinese. And when I chatted with him, I told him, that's good because you'll probably get a chance to, use those talents in the time that you're here. But he made the normal diplomatic niceties in his conversation and his remarks. They were very good, but he really hit hard on a couple of things. And one, that he said how China's going to work very hard on rule of law and democratic process. And he made that point a couple of times, which I thought was good. I don't necessarily, I'm enough of a skeptic not to buy completely into that, but the fact that they're working on it, and in fact they are working on that to some extent. He also hit hard on the point of that the cross-trade commitment between the United States and China was not commensurate with the relationship between two very large trading partners. And he then went on to imply that we could expect, which comes as a surprise to no one, that we'll get a little bit of a tit for tat as long as we go through the CNOOC type things or the rejection of Huawei and others in our country, that we will have probably our companies will have a harder time dealing in China than they might otherwise have, and it might ease if that were changed a little bit. He came across as very confident, and there's a thin line between confidence and arrogance. One's a really great quality, the other one's not so good. And but I think he represented the fact that sort of my view is our Chinese friends right now are feeling pretty good about themselves overall. They acknowledge the challenges they have, but they a little bit have the bit in their teeth, particularly in their relationship with the United States, because they do think we're having some hard times, which is partly correct. Bob McDonald from P&G was also there. He made some very good remarks. Solid guy, West Point graduate, Bill, and he talked about trying to work the business to business part a little bit. If we leave it to the businesses, we can keep the government out of it. We'll be all right, and I kind of agree with that too. I want to make a couple other points and then get into what you would rather talk about. But my friends in China, people that I've known a long time, some are in the military, though I've never seen them in uniform, and some are in business. But I would say they're people like me that I love the United States, I love my country, and they love China. They admit that China has foibles. I admit that the United States has foibles. They would really like to see our two nations get along well together. Now, I can't, China's not a monolith. This doesn't speak for everybody, but this speaks for some fairly serious people. And that would be really important. What they have on their minds right now is not our economic problems that we're having in the U.S. right now, because they see those, with their 6,000-year history of being cyclical in a way. But they really do worry about our political process, and that our seeming inability to grapple with our politicians, to grapple with our problems and come up with even a track toward the right answers. They have a sincere worry about this. This is shared by a lot of other friends I have as well. The overall relationship with China, I think, I want to tell a quick story because I talked to a financial group in Shanghai when I knew even less about finance than I know now. And so I chose to talk about airplanes, which is something I do know more about. But any of you who have shot a basketball or putted a golf ball or been skiing or something like that, you know that the key to doing that sort of thing well is a relaxed concentration. And the same thing with landing airplanes on a ship at night or any other time for that matter. If you try too hard at it, it doesn't work too well. You've got to kind of relax and work it in an easy way. And there's for the landing signal officers on a carrier, when you're trying to land at night and you get people that are in the airplane and there's nowhere else to turn and they're over controlling the airplane a little bit, they give a call to the pilot of easy with it. And that means, relax a little bit, don't work so hard at it. And that's sort of what we need to do with our China relationship as well, is there are voices in the United States that overreact to anything that they do, and sometimes on the other side there are people that underreact. So we need to realize that the Chinese, things that they say are primarily dedicated to their internal audience. Just like the things that emanate from the United States are not for the Chinese, they're for our consumption so people can get reelected. And that's something we have to realize about the Chinese and sort of take a steady strain with this and take it easy. I want to give one business example and then stop my soliloquy here. But I'll talk about the new Oakland Bay Bridge. I don't know if you all have been out to see the new Bay Bridge that ties in Oakland and Treasure Island, that part of it. Well, Prueher and America Bridge Company are in a joint venture with Caltrans, that great California institution. And they're building that bridge, which is supposed to be a 150-year bridge, last through tremors, earthquakes, the San Andreas Fault collapsing. The bridge is still going to be there. So it's supposed to be a 150-year bridge. It's really an architectural and an engineering feat. We could not be building that bridge without the Chinese. They have teamed with the Chinese steel fabrication company that built a foundry. They built 42 steel trusses for that bridge. They built the barge to transport the trusses to California, and they also built the barge, it's a crane, they call it the Left Coast Lifter. I think it's from Berkeley, but
that would have to be.
But they've got the Left Coast Lifter to put these trusses in place, and all of that has gone on with just business-to-business collaboration without government intervention. Now, I'm not quite so naive. You scratch very deeply between the big Chinese companies. You get to the government pretty soon, but that worked. There was not a lot of angst. It just worked, and they've done a great job with that, putting that bridge together. In fact, that same consortium of people is going to work the Tappan Zee Bridge here in New York and do it, because there is nowhere in the United States that we can make that steel. And so we got it from China, and they've done it, and there wasn't a lot of gouging with this. So it's a magnificent thing. It's a good sign of what can happen. The rhetoric is the people of China and the people of the United States. My view is the people get along pretty well. It's when we get our ideological hackles up that we really start to have problems on both sides. So with that as a preamble, I've exhausted all the things that I wanted to talk about.
Oh, no, we'll come back. So thank you very much. It's a great way for setting the stage. And David, you're still living in China. You've lived there, is it 26 years?
Almost 27 years now.
Almost 27 years living in Beijing, I recall.
Beijing, Shanghai, central China at some points.
So being still there, would you share some of your perspectives of just the climate, the environment, what's it like?
I mean, the physical environment, because I think you've probably all been reading a lot about that. Unfortunately, it's been a difficult winter in Beijing.
It's been a difficult winter here too. So
But just by way of background, I do live in Beijing. I've been in China a long time, and my background is actually in sinology. So I led a technology advisory practice for PwC for many years, but my background is in contemporary Chinese political science and economics. So I've kind of gone back to my academic roots with the Conference Board China Center. Our center was established in 2006 after doing about 10 years of various research projects with different Chinese agencies. We were signed into existence in 2006 by the Minister of Commerce at the time, who was none other than Bo Xilai, who you've probably been reading about quite a lot recently. Our center today studies the economy, the evolution of China's business environment, business conditions for MNC investors in China. We also do quite a lot of work in human capital, things like producing statistics on the size and nature of China's talent pool. For those of you doing business there, talent has been really a perfect storm for almost 2 decades now in China. It's a very difficult issue. And we do a lot of work in corporate leadership. So we do specifically research in corporate philanthropy and corporate sustainability, how firms, both Western and Chinese, are focusing, resourcing, funding, managing, measuring, and appraising their corporate philanthropy and sustainability work in China. We have I think a pretty a narrative on China that we've been working on for some time that I'd like to share with you now, kind of as a pretext to the discussion. We think that China is undergoing a very significant structural downshifting in its growth rate, well beyond where the growth rate has gone to already. We create an estimation of what you call potential GDP, i.e., if the labor and capital resources of a country are used efficiently through productivity, what is the sort of maximum growth rate the country is capable of? Our estimation is that from 2013 to 18, i.e. these 5 years, the average potential growth rate of China is 5.5%. And for the next 5 years, it goes down to about 3.5%. That may sound bad, but actually a slower growing, more balanced growing China would be better for everyone. I kind of made a snide remark about the environment, but this winter in Beijing and the very high pollution levels for most of the winter, what was undeniable evidence of the cost of China's unbalanced growth model. And if it's bad in Beijing, you can imagine it is much, much worse in hinterland cities. So the growth rate is downshifting. Now, China and the leadership can keep the growth above that trend rate by stimulating it with investment, which they have been for a long time. Investment now comprises upwards of 60% of China's growth. Consumption around 35%. Japan, at the height of its investment bubble, was nowhere near those extremes. In fact, China is an extreme outlier in terms of the amount of investment it uses to drive its economy and the relatively repressed amount of consumption that drives the economy. From the 10th five-year plan and the 11th five-year plan and now the 12th that started in 2011, the leadership has said we need to change our growth model from quantity to quality, from investment-led to consumption-led. The rhetoric is there, but there has been very little evidence of change. In fact, it's gone the other direction. China is not unlike any other place in this regard. Making structural changes in an economy is difficult. Interest groups that kind of benefited from the growth model are resistant to the change. And that happens here, it happens in Europe, it's happening in Japan, and it's happening very evidently in China. So the key question is whether China descends softly and smoothly to this new lower growth rate, or whether it actually falls quite abruptly to it on the back of a financial crisis of some sort. We're studying this now very deeply, and we believe that, boy, if you look at the sort of hallmarks of financial crises, classic financial crises, China is on a locomotive trajectory to that end. The only thing that kind of differentiates China from other places that have undergone this experience is that their currency isn't very exposed to international markets.
So, David, can I ask you a follow-up point on that? Because I guess just to expand a little bit, two things is, one, I was in China in 2010 and with one of our global board meetings, and we had as a speaker the recently retired head of the finance ministry. And I remember a couple of points that he made. And one was that, and he said it in a humorous way, he said, it was the recognition that China has grown to where it is based on essentially an export economy, right, selling to the rest of the world. And he said, and we recognize that if we're going to continue to grow, we're going to have to, and the way he said it, he laughed and he said, we're going to have to teach our people to spend like Americans.
Yes.
And so your thoughts around that, but also, and at that time, so 2010, they were working on the 12th five-year plan. But the other anecdotal comment that was made is, well, the power of a one-system government is that if you decide you're going to do something, you can actually get it done. Decisions can be made and you can change course. So what would be your perspective on?
Well, it's true. I mean, I think the old adage, I don't know if it was Churchill or someone else that said it, might have been FDR actually, that dictatorships or authoritarian governments work really well until they don't. And so China is capable of great things. But today, we observe a leadership that is very constrained by patronage relationships. So the factors that make a Chinese leader a leader are not institutionalized. So their tenure, their ascent, even their sphere of influence are not depicted in any document or law. Their ability to rule depends on the support of their beneficiaries underneath them in their factional network. They lubricate that network by allocating resources to firms and individuals and cities who support them. So in some ways, they can do things very boldly and aggressively, which they have done and has arguably been a huge differentiator of the Chinese economy. They've, unlike India and other emerging markets, have been able to move millions of people out of the way of monstrous highways and other things that have enabled enormous productivity and created China, or turned China into the premier production base for almost every product now in the world. But on the other hand, when they actually need to undertake reforms to actually enable consumption, all of those sort of large-scale projects actually leverage the resources of the household, the savings of the people, lent through very low interest rates, if not no interest rates, to state-owned enterprises who then built huge things at the expense of the household. The same is true for households in cities. Local cities in China finance 75% of their fiscal budgets through real estate sales. Well, of course, they're incented to sell the real estate then to developers at the highest price, who then sell it to consumers in the city at that high price so that public services can be provided to the individuals. So there's a lot about the current growth model that actually works against consumption in China. It's a very, very interesting phenomenon. But just to make a remark, as I know what I'm saying probably sounds a little bit alarming. It's not unusual. High growth economies in Asia, almost all of them, kind of experienced a 30-year to 37-year growth spurt. First with exports on the basis of low factor costs, then infrastructure, then global money came in, then real estate, then kind of financial system instability and kind of a crash of various degrees of severity and a downshifting to a new lower rate. And then kind of a structural reformation, if you will, and places like Indonesia and Korea have kind of come through it in good shape, and others maybe like Thailand kind of continue to struggle through it. So China is exceptional in many ways, but it's not immune to the laws of economics, nor is its leadership infallible. And what we're telling our members now is that this transition is going to be significant and special and actually entrain many silver linings. But at this juncture, sort of setting realistic expectations for China market growth and profitability is essential. I've advised boards, I've advised executive committees, and it's astonishing for how long we have all set China targets that were so much above most other places. You know, you sit around the table and it's LATAM 3%, North America 1.8, Europe 2, China 28. It's been like that for years and years. And now is the time, and I think from a board perspective, it's very important to get that right, because so many projections in China are just straight line, presuming that China is going to be the largest economy by 2020, that everything is going to grow geometrically, and that the growth rates of the last 20 years can be extrapolated indefinitely into the future. That is a classic hallmark of a mania. And so what we're recommending our members do is just be realistic about it. Look at it carefully, do your diligence, and make sure that the market you're targeting is really there. For years and years, foreign companies in China have thought 1.4 billion customers. If only we can get to them, it's huge. And so they've allocated their resources towards government relations and partnering and anything they could do to get market access. We're now recommending that you still need to do that because market access isn't easy in China, but just make sure that the end market you think is really there, just like you would anywhere else.
See, I think both of this is a great setting the stage from an economic standpoint. So just one more sort of stage-setting question, Admiral, for you is the turmoil that's going on in that part of the world. I mean, in particular, North Korea comes to mind. I mean, what are your views on how that's going to affect everything?
Well, if you take the long view, I think the turmoil in North Korea is something that we have seen a version of it before. What we have is a couple of things are different, I believe. One is the North Korean leader, Kim Jong-un, is young. He's an unknown quantity, and certainly by our standards, he seems to be given to irrational pronouncements. They're not irrational by the way he thinks about them. But we have a common goal with the Chinese. Sorry. We have a common goal with the Chinese of having a non-nuclear Korean peninsula. I mean, we would very much like to see that, and so would they. But what is a little different now, and I think all of you have seen probably documentaries and things, and there have been some books now of people that have escaped from North Korea, of the level of poverty and that exists there, which is just woeful. And 15 years ago, there was a lot of talk of reunification. And there's not much talk of reunification right now. And what this instability is, the big factor is not so much what happens to North Korea, but how it affects the relationship between the main players, who are China, Japan, the U.S., and Russia to a large extent in the region. What is different this time, I think, is China, and this comes from first-hand conversations as well as the way they are acting right now. We like to say that it's up to China to solve this because they have leverage. Well, China does have leverage. There was an example when North Korea would not come to the table for six-party talks. And the six-party talks being North Korea, South Korea, China, U.S., Japan, and Russia. And this was it's the great hope for solving the North Korean issue, which has been fruitless so far. But the North Koreans wouldn't come to the table. The Chinese shut off the oil and water for about 2 days, and quickly the North Koreans came to the table. What the Chinese did a little differently is they did not do that publicly. They allowed North Korea to change their mind and save face, but they did it nonetheless. And so they do have leverage if they choose to use it. Right now, the Chinese are very concerned and do not like what North Korea is doing right now. The Chinese interest is in a buffer state. They're worried about having a bunch of impoverished people come across the border. That's a traditional worry. But they're also very concerned that with North Korea talking about having a nuclear capability, and they've done 3 nuclear detonations of something, not warheads. They haven't paired these things up with missiles, but they've shot missiles and they've done 3 nuclear detonations, we're pretty sure. But if North Korea persists in this and persists with their rhetoric for we want to be a nuclear state and be like India and Pakistan and become a declared nuclear state, then all of a sudden probably Japan and South Korea would say we need to have a nuclear umbrella because the United States we've backed off a little bit on the strength of, or the thoroughness of our nuclear umbrella for them. Most people concede that Japan could probably have a nuclear capability fairly quickly if they chose to. And that gives a dynamic in the region. If you have a nuclear Japan, maybe a nuclear South Korea, all of a sudden China's nuclear capability, which is growing, is diminished in effect. And so you've got a whole different neighborhood there than resulting from the North Korean actions. So this creates an instability, and how it affects the economic processes. I think if my working view of anything that the Chinese do is look as how does it affect their stability, because that's essential to their economic development, which is essential to the legitimacy of the Communist Party in China. So they don't like it. Long answer, they don't like what's going on right now. That's different than before, where they're sort of using the North Koreans.
Interesting.
You know, I would just kind of add to that at kind of a meta level. There are many sort of positive influences on China now.
I'm sorry, we're just might use.
And one of them is, you know, in terms of geopolitics and all, China has been quite happy for a long time to sort of play by the table's edge, intervene when it suits them, kind of do things its own way and ignore the global community, claiming we're an emerging market, don't bother us, don't impose your rules on us. Now is the second largest economy in the world, and arguably maybe the largest in some time to come. There's a lot of pressure from the global community on all aspects of China, military, economic, trade, and everything. And it can't ignore it anymore. So China is kind of compelled to step up to the plate to deal with North Korea because the international community expects it to. It's expected to adhere to trade policy and WTO norms and other things. And a major question going forward is, will this pressure yield a positive outcome in terms of a more integrated, conformist, compatible China with trade, with business norms and everything else, or will it kind of force China towards a more isolationist position? I'm very hopeful for the former. And I think we're seeing some interesting signs of it. And I think the North Korean example is an interesting issue because, among many other things, it seems to be fostering an unusually close working relationship between the U.S. and China on the matter. So there's some interesting positives that are embroiled in all of these sort of sensational geopolitical topics today.
Can I piggyback
Please,
on that?
please.
The point that David made about China having changed and what I describe it, they're a have nation now. They're
Yes.
not a have-not nation. They still claim when it suits them to be we're a third world nation, and
Yes.
a lot of
Yes.
and a lot of China is, but pretty much they're a nation with a lot to lose now. They're sophisticated. They have the need for energy, the need for communications, the need for international finance, and all those things also gives them vulnerabilities when gives pressure points. And so this issue of there being a have nation, they use a responsible stakeholder is the verbiage that goes with it. The Chinese so far are not ready, I think, to assume the financial and the other costs of being a global leader. They're reluctant to do that, but they're sort of this issue is forcing them into it, as you pointed out.
Yeah.
One other question, just in terms of, again, going back to doing business in China, corruption, right? So with presumably everybody that we have in our audience today are American companies. So when you're sitting here and you're faced with the FCPA rules and enforcement agenda, what are your perspectives on the corruption there?
You can go first.
Again, my firsthand knowledge of it comes more in working with the PLA, which is also in a state of flux. This brings in another subject other than corruption.
Admiral, I'm sorry, your mic doesn't seem down, so just try that in the back.
It may be that they didn't want to hear. Okay.
We can hear you, but this is better.
Okay. The origins of the People's Liberation Army was regional. They were in regions and they supported themselves, and they built up things of raising crops and pigs and things like that, and it evolved into moving hot cars and gear and drugs and all sorts of things and commodities around. And Jiang Zemin tried to get that under control to make the PLA beholden more than just politically, but also financially to the party and to the National People's Congress for their finances, and tried to take them out of the business. That was a big source of corruption. David talked about Bo Xilai and in the corruption process. I think one of the problems in China, and it's not unique to China either, but as they try to work their businesses on the world stage, the cronyism and the corruption and the collusion, those things that work against rule of law, they work against solving problems, adjudicating them in courts and things like that. So the corruption is a serious effort. I think with Xi Jinping, it is more than lip service, which we've had in the past. Like Wen Jiabao talked about this a whole lot. His family got enriched a great deal while he was in power. So, and as you talk about the people watering their support base, that's what really goes on in China. I think that the issue from the United States, where if pure rule of law is over here, the United States is somewhere here, and if pure just relationships is over here, China is in this category right here, and the relationships have embedded in them a lot of corruption. There are advantages to both in a way, but we'll eventually merge a bit, I think.
Yeah, it's, I mean, first off, I should say that our members are reporting that the level of corruption today in China is much higher than it's ever been for them, or more obvious, if you will. That it used to be kind of hidden, and now it was the kind of invisible 800-pound gorilla in the room, and now it's just sitting right at the table in almost every instance. Petty corruption is one thing, but what we call structural corruption is really the thing that's having the most impact. And structural corruption is, in our definition, the use of relationships and connections by political elite to access commercial opportunities and extract supernormal profits from those opportunities. It happens everywhere in some form or another. In China, there are no institutional checks on it, and that's the problem. So under a large state-owned enterprise like PetroChina, you have, for example, or any of them, you have 900 or 1,000 subsidiaries, probably several dozen beneficially owned by the elite, who enjoy preferential relationships for supplying essential things. An expose was written in Caixin magazine about 6 months ago on the high-speed rail corruption around a elite-owned supplier of bathroom fixtures, where they were selling stainless steel sinks to the high-speed rail projects that cost at the cost of around $8,000 per sink, probably with an ex-factory cost of about $1. Those are good margins, I would say. Now, that's very entrenched. And the reason it matters is because it's an invisible barrier to foreign companies. You just don't know it's there. Would the Chinese like to have GE and Siemens trains on their high-speed rail network? Yes, but GE and Siemens can't play that game. So indigenous innovation as a policy is used to keep them out. Not because of some ideological preference for domestic suppliers, but so that the players in the ecosystem can participate in that game. And it matters a lot. And it's one of Xi Jinping's, the new president's, stated focus to address this problem. But as Admiral said, you know, even the very highest ups, Wen Jiabao himself, who for the last 5 years has been proclaiming the need for even political reform and democratization, if you can believe it, he used that word. Turns out his family managed to accrue upwards of $2.7 billion in assets during his tenure. So can they change it or can they not? That is the very, very big question. This also manifests in what you all deal with in China around vague regulations and arbitrary application of those regulations. Ultimately, having weak regulations and arbitrary application enables rent seeking. China is a government of people. It is not a government of institutions or a government of regulations. And even back to imperial times, the regulations have always kind of been vague and arbitrarily enforced, and what that enables is political figures to actually rent seek as business takes place. Now, one of the reasons that business for most MNCs has gotten more difficult over the years in China is because the regulators have become more and more knowledgeable about how foreign companies make money. And that understanding has enabled them to control access points. So it's a very serious problem. The top leadership now is very focused on it. Bo Xilai and many others have now been taken out on anti-corruption charges. It looks like more are coming. And we have to wait and see whether it's institutionalized or whether it's just kind of an optical exercise. A few people are taken out and then business as usual, or if it becomes something more institutionalized, more systematic, and a new normal. Hopefully, we'll get some indication of that over the coming months. Now, I guess I just add one final point, because we just convened our members about this topic about 3 weeks ago, and we talked specifically about managing third-party fraud risk. And I was surprised and impressed by the level of sophistication that MNCs have developed to sort of manage this, with anti-corruption hotlines and things of the sort. So these issues are difficult in China, managing IP risk, managing corruption risk, and other things, but they're not unmanageable. There are things that can be done to contain the risk without paralyzing the organization, but they are tough and they're costly. They're costly.